Good evening, good evening, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm your host, Kiana Canada, and welcome to the Kiana Canada Show. Ladies and gentlemen, I had to change locations because I was in the graduate school and graduate school was closing. And when I looked at the video, it seemed to be of low quality. I'm not sure exactly why that was, but we are going to try this video over. We're going to try it again and see if it is better this time. What I did was I made that video private, and I'll probably do some edits on that video. Hopefully, I can still keep it because there were some really good points that I made in that video, but perhaps I could actually discuss them in this video. So, ladies and gentlemen, before we get into today's topic, it's important for me to make you aware of a practice. And this practice is called transnational repression. And so, transnational repression is basically where states, what they do is they reach across their borders to silence the dissent of their citizens. And let me just adjust my chair for a moment. Okay. And they do it in a number of ways. So, some of the most hard tactics, or the hardest tactics that they use is like extraordinary renditions, incommunicado detention, enforced disappearances. But ladies and gentlemen, some of the soft tactics that they use is digital threats and intrusive surveillance. So essentially what the state is doing is reaching its tentacles across its borders, and this is through its diplomatic relations or through its embassy or consulate offices. In some capacities, it involves intelligence agencies that are actually situated within the host country and have hired uh, individuals in the host country, so IT individuals within the host country, to actually carry out this practice of intimidation, surveillance, and digital repression. So it's a very disconcerting practice. It's very serious, and it's something that we all should take serious and bring awareness to. Now that that has been said, ladies and gentlemen, I want to talk about a class that I had today, which is restorative justice. Um, if you've been following my story, you know that I'm doing a master's in international human rights law. And in this program, just a moment, let me adjust. Okay. So in this program, what I'm doing is you know that I'm doing a master's, and then one of the modules that I'm taking is restorative justice. And so we had a very thought-provoking conversation today. And so our previous discussions was about the victims in the restorative justice process, like who are they? And the defendants in the restorative justice process, who are they? And today we talked about the state and whether the state should be involved in the restorative justice process. And so this was a very thought-provoking question for me. It was definitely a question that I wanted to give commentary on because I had some very strong opinions about it. And so my opinion is that when he raised this question as to whether the state should have a more limited, or whether the state should have like more of an important role in the restorative justice process, or whether the state should have a limited role in the restorative justice process, my position was that the state's role should be very limited. And the reason why I said that the state's role should be very limited is because we have seen time and time again where the state has inserted itself into a, let's say, for instance, a practice that's supposed to be rehabilitative and there to restore the community, but yet ends up actually causing more damage and harm. And so my argument was that the state's role should be very limited, so the state should only come in where the victim and the previously incarcerated person, or if that person is incarcerated, so that offender uh, is being introduced to the restorative justice process. And I guess, in a sense, that the criminal justice system should carry out the terms and conditions of the contract of, for the offender, and to make sure that all parties are comfortable moving forward. And then the state should not have any more involvement until the end. And so the end is, at the end, there is the completion of this restorative justice process, or there maybe perhaps in some cases the restorative justice process is unsuccessful. And so I based this argument on the idea, I guess the way that I actually developed this argument in my mind was that I've seen in the Republic of Ireland, so there has been the Department of Children. I always forget this, forget what the entire name is because it's so long. I'm looking it up now. So it's the Department of Children, Equality, Disability, Integration, and Youth. And so we have seen that in the Republic of Ireland, that an organization that has the state involved in the way it makes its decisions, because, for example, some organizations get funding from the state. And that was a question that was also raised, is whether the government should fund restorative justice processes. And I argued no. And so my reasoning behind that argument was that you know, I was thinking about how in the Republic of Ireland there is NASC, the Migrant Refugee Rights Center. And NASC, the the Migrant and Refugee Rights Center is partly funded by the Department of Children. And this department, I think, has a significant role and a persuasive role in how the organization NAS makes decisions. So, for example, in the Republic of Ireland, there are a category of asylum seekers who are coming from countries that normally produce refugees. And those are mostly who the organization NAS, the Migrant Refugee Rights Center, I guess promotes its services to. Whereas if you are not coming from a country that is said to produce refugees, then it is highly likely that you will get the kind of support that these other asylum seekers are receiving. And as you can see in this instance, what is happening is that certain organizations are fettering their discretion as to who they extend their services to and who they do not, right? And so this is the problem that I have with government playing a significant role in the restorative justice process, because the government can be very persuasive and sometimes manipulative, and sometimes coercive as well. And that was one of the questions that was brought up today in the class. And so it wasn't necessarily tied to the government, but how Dr. Olayode raised this question. So what he asked us was, could the criminal justice system coerce an offender or a suspect into into participating in the restorative justice process? And so I think the answer is yes to that because essentially the restorative justice process is more like a plea deal, right? It could be seen as a plea deal. And one of the arguments that was raised and something that was weighing in the back of my mind is whether or not that this deprives the person of the presumption of innocence. Because let's say, for instance, a person is on trial, or excuse me, has been charged with a crime that they wholeheartedly um, state that they did not commit. Is it necessary, or is it even okay for the criminal justice system to try and pressure them into any process without allowing them to maintain their right to innocence? And so my argument is no, it's not fair. The person that is involved in the restorative justice process, they should be able to maintain their innocence. It is their right to a fair trial. The right to fair trial is very important, very, very important. And so, ladies and gentlemen, I really enjoyed this class because an argument that I also put forward was that the government should have a limited role in the restorative justice process because, on the ground that this is something that is allowing structures to be torn down and to be rebuilt. And I think it's impossible to do that thoroughly when we have the state intervening in the entire process, right? And so another question that was raised, that Dr. Alioli raised, oh my God, I'm having so difficult time with his last name. Just a moment, ladies and gentlemen. Aliodi. So another question that Dr. Aliodi raised was whether the restorative justice process would trigger and harm the victim further. And so I raised my hand and I said, I don't think that the restorative justice process would be as triggering for the victim as going through a trial would be. And so the examples that I gave was that, for example, the prosecutor would call, in some instances, the prosecutor would call the victim to the stand to give testimony. And although this is not an adversarial process when the prosecutor is asking the victim questions, the, it's still, a recounting of that harm. And so not only are so not only is the victim recounting this harm in in front of the prosecutor, but they are also recounting it in front of an audience because most trials are public. And so you can kind of see, I think if we look at it from that perspective, we can see that this can be triggering for a victim, right? And not only are they cross-examined by the prosecutor, but they are also cross-examined by the defense attorney. And when the defense attorney cross-examines a victim, they're asking leading questions. So, for example, the questions that they're asking is, you weren't in such and such place during such and such time, were you? You left your home at 10 a.m. Isn't that correct? You didn't see the defendant around the corner around 10 a.m. Isn't that correct? And so you can kind of see that these are leading questions that the defense attorney asks the victim, which really is designed to limit the way in which the victim responds. And so with the restorative justice process, usually this is a process that can take place within a confidential setting where a confidential or controlled setting where it's the defendant and the defense attorney, it's the prosecutor and the victim, and any interested parties within this particular case. And usually it's a very small group of people. It's not like a public trial. And from this point of view, of the restorative justice process, you can see it's more confidential and less likely to trigger the victim, because during the restorative justice process, the aim is to allow the offender or the previously incarcerated person to make concessions or to make amends for the wrong that they did to the victim. And it also allows for there to be, you know, a breaking away of those harmful structures and building anew. So making the victim, in a sense, whole again, and doing it together with the person who actually created that harm. And so I think what's important during this process is that both parties are prepared and ready to enter this process and to go through it, because if one party is not prepared to go through it, then it could have the opposite effect, right? So it may not be successful. And that was one of the, I think that that was one of the grounds that Dr. Eliodi uh, raised, is whether or not, this should be voluntary. And I think there was a consensus within the class that we all should, or excuse me, there was a consensus from the class that the restorative justice process should be voluntary. And so I like the argument from one of my cohorts, because my cohort, or the um, I think one of my cohorts gave some feedback and uh, illuminated us about the restorative justice process in Canada. And basically, what she said was that she knew about the restorative justice process from when she was a little girl, and that this process is, eh, at least in the jurisdiction of Canada, has been shown to do reparative work. And so youth, in her experience and from the statistics that she has read, that when youth go through this process, so she's talking about juvenile offenders, when they go through this process of restorative justice, they're less likely to recidivate and offend. And I think that, there's statistics, to reiterate, there's statistics to back that up, and that she found this to be, really important in the criminal justice process. So I appreciated that she shared that with us, because it's always good to hear stories like that, right? It's always good to hear stories where there is a process that works and that actually benefits both parties, and that it's not, uh, debasing a party. And so I really liked that she shared that with us, because it was good to hear. And we also talked about whether an independent body should take control, and that goes back to the argument that I made about, NASC, the Migrant Refugee Rights Center, and this was, and of course, that argument was outside the context of restorative justice, but one of the going back to the question at hand is whether an independent body should facilitate the restorative justice process. And so my position was yes, a independent body should facilitate the restorative justice process because an independent body does not necessarily have a stake in this process, right? And what I guess what I offered during this discussion was that I think that there should have been so during this process, there should be an independent body that actually takes minutes or notes, and those notes and minutes are reviewed annually. And this process and these practices are uh, thoroughly reviewed for any governmental overreach or any breaches to the contracts or any human rights violations. And so I think that my cohorts in my group, when we're discussing this, found that to be, you know, useful. And, um, you know, I think one of them said, yeah, that's an interesting idea. So there was a lot of interesting ideas that were being uh, ping pong back and forth during this discussion today. And it was something that I really enjoyed because Dr. Eliodi is very animated and he asks a lot of questions. And not only does he ask a lot of questions, but he gives us space to actually answer those questions, right? And it's like during this class that we have, it is, I guess, interactive is the word that I'm looking for. It's very interactive. And ladies and gentlemen, that's not like the only class that I have that is like this. There are other professors that I really want to review, but the reason why I talked about this today was because I was so intrigued by today's topic. And um, it's very interesting to me because what I'm trying to do is really learn a lot about theories in criminology and how they impact certain aspects of the world. And so whether that's global criminology and theories about globalism, or whether that is a feminist criminology, or liberal feminism, or if that's learning about strain theory, or learning about these other theories, rational choice theory. It's all something that I'm very interested about and really want to know more about. When I was in undergrad and I was taking, I think, a criminal justice course at Penn State University. Um, so that was like the first university that I went to before I transferred to the University of Arizona. I had a professor who said that we needed to tie all of our arguments to a theory in criminology. And so I didn't know how useful that was at that point. But, after it was broke down to me, and so basically, and I think that was like the first semester or the second semester, or yeah, first or second semester, but that of my undergrad. I think it was like the first, but when she broke it down to me, I was like, okay, this makes a lot of sense, and I think this helps me to really understand criminology and crime, and so what I did when I was taking this restorative justice class, I was like, okay, restorative justice, there is a component of criminology with this, if not, this is entirely based on, the theory of criminology. And so I wanted to research more about the theories, and I want to look into more about theories about restorative justice and rehabilitation. I think that's an important thing to do. And so I'm trying to think about what else did we talk about in the class. There was some other stuff that we did talk about, but not bringing that up because we're just talking about some case studies. But what else? What else? What else did we talk about? Hmm. I think that was really the most important part of this class is whether or not the state should have a larger role in the restorative justice process and whether or not the state's role should be limited, and whether or not uh, the victim should participate. And again, I think everyone, and there was a consensus within the class that the restorative justice process should be voluntary. It should not be coercive. It shouldn't be coercive for a person who is accused of a crime because, again, um, the restorative justice process could be seen as a plea deal for someone who is seeking to maintain their innocence. And if they're coerced into participating in such a practice or process, that could actually interfere with the presumption of innocence and their right to fair trial. And for the victim, again, the victim should not be coerced into the restorative justice process as well, because if they're not ready and they are being forced to go into this process, then it could have a negative impact on the victim. And I think that that is something that we want to minimize. And in a sense, we want the restorative justice process to be very successful. And so I am so grateful to Dr. Eliodi for this class today, because it was something that I really contemplated on and thought about throughout the entire day, and was a discussion that I really enjoyed. So I'm looking forward to more discussions like this. And yeah, it was just a very interesting class. So kudos to Dr. Eliodi. And ladies and gentlemen, if you have not already, don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel. You can also follow me on Facebook. I will attach my Facebook account in the description box of this video. For some reason, my Facebook account is not making its way up in the algorithm. I am attributing that to transnational repression. But again, we still have to be mindful that where there is interesting and useful content and informative and educational content, that we should go out and seek it. So I think that what I'll do is, to reiterate, I'll put that in the description box below so that you can actually take a look at some of the things that I post on Facebook. It's a very new Facebook account. It's, I think, less than a year old. But I'm just starting to get a hang of Facebook. Some people have moved to Blue Sky, and I'm wanting to know what all that's about and looking to probably know more about that. And so if I do move to that, I'll let you guys know. But there you have it. And ladies and gentlemen, be safe out there. We'll talk to you next time. Bye bye.